Okay. Good afternoon. I am Dave Lyons, the chairman of the Charter and Code Committee. It is Thursday, October 26th at 4 o'clock, and I would like to convene the meeting in accordance with the rules of the state of Delaware. So first, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, justice for all.
Thank you. Hey, Marcia, come on up.
Marcia?
You didn't want to give up the sunshine, did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start with a roll call, if we can. We're going to start with those in the room first. So,
Marcia Schick.
thank you.
Elaine Ball.
Okay.
Oprah, town manager.
And we also have via Zoom Dawn Hanks. Dawn, and I see Commissioner Persinger as well.
And Jen McDermott.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Remember Jen's on.
So I just would take a minute. Sorry, Jen. Let's take a minute to introduce Jen McDermott. She's kind enough to join us. Jen lives at 202 Jersey, right? That's right. Okay. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate your time and service.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the first action is to adopt the agenda. So can I get a motion to adopt today's agenda? So Dan, thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Marcia. All in favor? Aye? Aye. Okay, we'll say unanimously. All right. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up for any public comment. Anything from, since we've got somebody public comment.
Wow. Get in line.
We'll go ahead.
I'm Steve Spence, by the way, and I've been a advocate for various interests for many years in Dewey, and I'm here today on behalf of Highway 1 Limited Partnership and its affiliates. And thank you for letting me come at all. I mean, I found out about the meeting yesterday, so I don't have a lot of preparation in terms of what is the scope of the committee's tasks. And so this may be a little bit out of left field. Last summer, in the beginning of the summer, we had an exchange with the town manager about our view of the building permit process, perhaps having gone a little overboard in terms of the number of things for which one might apply for a permit. And it was suggested in that conversation that we perhaps recommend possible code amendments to that. And then I think I wasn't aware of today's meeting until yesterday, and so clearly not on the agenda per se. But we had two things that we thought would be of interest to the committee, and maybe the committee would take up on its own at some point, not today, but at some point.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to have
because it would be a recommendation for a code change that's not in the zoning code, it's in the building code chapter, and actually in the fee, I guess, in the fee chapter. And so I brought a couple of little pieces of material with me today that I would hand in, and then just let the committee decide whether it wants to take them up at some point. The two issues are, there is an exemption in the building code chapter as to whether you need to get a permit in certain circumstances where you're primarily performing repairs or replacement, and the material costs in the current code don't exceed $1,000. If you're doing some repair or replacement work and you're not building a structure, first of all, you're doing something that's maintaining or repairing an existing structure. You're not talking about expansion or building a brand new something. Those clearly require a permit under the general rules. But we were going to recommend that you consider increasing that dollar limit because the cost of materials has gone up so greatly over the years. And there's certain, and my client in particular has a number of businesses where it's constantly performing repairs and maintenance, painting, doing various things that it does in the ordinary course. But if it's various contractors being asked to get permits for a job that's, pick a number, $2,500 job, or $300,000, or 300, that's not right, a $3,000 job, excuse me. Or if it's what I would describe as normal maintenance, We were of the view that while the contractor clearly has to get a contractor's license to be doing work in Dewey, it shouldn't necessarily have to go out and get a building permit to do what we consider to be maintenance. And so the genesis of the suggestion of what you review is two things. One is, and I'll just hand up a copy of the chapter. I have three things that I was going to, just let you have and then decide what you want to do with them. And they were the chapter itself, the building code chapter, a copy of something that Sussex County puts out that it's given to the municipalities and is something that, because the county reviews building plans and approves them for what I call construction projects, traditional construction projects, it, as a separate political body, has some exclusions for things that it doesn't require permits. So I thought you should see that, just to see it. And then the other one is the actual form that the town's been using as to whether you need a permit or not. And the permit form, and I'll just hand these up first and then I'll come back. So there's the permit form is actually 5 pages. So that's one document I think is here. And the second is the chapter itself, which is self-explanatory. And then a couple examples of the Sussex County, what Sussex County doesn't deem necessary to get a permit for, a couple copies of the same document. And in 71, point 4, D, it's the sentence that says a building permit shall not be required for normal maintenance requiring less than $1,000 of material costs. We were simply asking that you recommend something to the commissioners that might increase that number to a larger number.
Okay.
5,000 sticks in my mind. It doesn't, I don't really have a view. It might be helpful to talk to the building official to just see what she thinks about what might be a reasonable increase, but we thought 1,000 was probably too low. So 71.4D is the one suggested area. Interestingly enough, in 71.3A, one might at least look at that language once as to whether or not any minor amendment to it might be appropriate, because it currently says any person who may desire to erect, alter, repair, that's the key word in my view, repair, move, raise, or add to any building or other structure, and then it goes on to a list of fences, bulkheads, and retaining walls, etc., shall first apply for a permit. And I wonder whether really repairs are really necessary in that context, but that's, again, just something for you to consider. And then the last thing is the form itself. I think the form takes something out of the application form, takes something out of context that, again, it's not part of the code, but it's the public or the general contractors and the subcontractors see, is that it includes within the application form a long definition of construction activities as if that's what's covered and what you need a permit for. But the definition is taken out of a different code section in chapter 71, which is really directed toward what you're not supposed to be doing in the summer. The definition of construction activities in 71.7 is a long list of things you shouldn't be doing on a Sunday or in certain hours and certain times during the summer in Dewey and holidays. But when you look at it in the context of the form application for a building permit, it is suggestive to the reader as if you're doing any of these things, you have to get a permit, as opposed to not be doing them things on holidays and weekends and various other times. So I think the form itself is a little misleading about what is it that you're really supposed to get a permit for. And then the last example I provide, that just one.
Is that, are you talking about the actual permit application itself when you say the form?
Well, it's a little confusing because the form, here, I'll hand you this one I have to actually have. It's got, do I need a permit?
Okay.
And then it's got these rules. And then it continues on and it incorporates the about what you're not supposed to be doing to lead you down the path of that's what you need to get a permit. And I'm not sure that the very first page,
Construction
71,
activities.
71, the definition, but it pulls out of the section that's really about what you're not supposed to be doing as opposed to what is a construction activity for a permit. It's what you're not supposed to do on weekends, on holidays, and certain months during the summer. I think it just pulls it out. So those three things, the amount of money for the exemption, but what's really required, do we really need to require permits for repairs? And then this form itself, which I think is just a little misleading. The last example I would provide, and then I thank you for your time, and I don't have anything else to add, was the classic example of your HVAC system goes down, and your contractor comes out and says, this isn't gonna, this had its, it's 20 years old or it's 15 years old. Right now, I would suggest to you that the application form for the town of Dewey Beach would contemplate that contractor has to go get a building permit to replace your HVAC system. He's not building anything new. He's just largely coming in and taking the two big pieces out and putting two new pieces in. And the county doesn't, I think, if I read the form right from the county doesn't require that. It's a repair. Do we really want to collect permit fees for that type of work? And I can think of a few other examples. I'm off, and my client is all in favor of, if we're making the building larger, if we're building anything new, if we're putting a new roof on. I mean, there's certain things that are, a capital project, if you will, on a building that, to the extent the town wants to define them as such, you should get a permit to do that, because it's a structural element, if you will, that you're dealing with, or you're expanding something, or you're putting up a fence, or whatever the list you want to include is. The category that we were struggling with is the repair category, and what is really meant by all that? And do you really need a permit to do a repair, unless you're actually building a structure of some kind? So that was what the inquiry was, and whether or not it might be helpful to make a recommendation to the council about any alterations that might be made to the exemption, the definition of what's really required, and whether we should just try to amend in a way that would exclude certain types of things, or change the use of the word repair in that illustrative definition. And then the form itself, I think just takes one definition and moves it someplace else, which is really not applicable. And if you took some time to look at all that and made some recommendation, we'd be thrilled. Okay. That was it. That's all I had.
That's great. All right.
I was going to sit and watch for a little while, but.
Is to think of it, because I think there's a lot of good points in that, especially with the fact that in the last year.
So we're really not supposed to comment on this, it's not on our agenda, so.
Yeah, no, I didn't expect you to
appreciate
necessarily
this.
do anything.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
And I appreciate it. I didn't expect you to do anything with it other than take it as a possible future agenda item.
Okay.
Right.
And if you did decide to do that, I'd try to come back and probably make a public record of what I would recommend. But I didn't expect that you would do much more than listen for a few minutes, take in a little of information, decide what you might want to do with it at a future meeting.
Absolutely.
So no, I agree with that.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, thank you for letting me come and talk.
Thank you.
No, just a lot for a while.
I see, is there any other public comment? I see David's on, so I didn't know if he wanted to.
Yes.
David Moskowitz, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, so David Moskowitz, full-time resident, Dewey Beach, live here with my family. I just want to correct what Mr. Spencer said. So it's actually $1,000 in material, but the minimum permit is $50, so it's actually $1,500 for a contractor. And I agree with Mr. Spence that the amount should be raised. And just to give you a little of my situation, in May I had to replace the water heater after 7 years. When I last replaced it, it was $800, so it did not require a building permit. Now water heaters are over $1,500. My family went without hot water for a week. And one would think, like, I asked the plumber, is this normal? It takes a week to get a permit. And you think a water heater permit would be done automatically because you're looking to pay money to the town. The town actually takes a week to review it, and they tell the plumber that all permits, even those that are under $1,500, should go to the plumber. So you have a lot of plumbers won't even do business in Dewey anymore because of all the paperwork required. Like for Dewey, they actually have to have a special person to do it. But the amount of work required just to do a building permit, because a water heater now is over 1,500 is insane. And that amount hasn't gone up in some time, maybe 12, 14 years. And I remember when I was commissioner, which was like already like 4 years ago, I tried to raise that building permit fee and nothing happened. So, I mean, my request would be sort of like similar to Mr. Spence, if you're looking to raise it. Right now, it's $1,000, I believe, in materials, or $1,500 if you have a contractor. Perhaps doubling it, like something like $2,000 in materials or $2,500 for a contractor, even $3,000 and $3,500, and then have that amount go up by inflation. Because try to get any repair person for under $1,500 these days, everything requires a permit, but even things that you like a water heater that what used to not be covered by permit are now covered by permit. So I would agree with what Mr. Spence said, but I wouldn't go to 7,000. I would probably stay in the 3,000 to 4,000 range, because the town does rely on this as a revenue source.
Okay. All right, thank you for your comments, Dave.
Sorry to distract you.
That's all right, no worries. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'd like to move on to the first item on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes for May 24th of 2022. Any comments or discussion on those minutes? Okay, can I get a motion to approve them? Blaine, and a second? Dan, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous? Okay, great. All right, at this point, Commissioner Persinger,
Yes.
I was just hoping you could take a minute and just kind of, with the change in kind of the direction of the committee, is just kind of reiterate for us all kind of the goal of, the committee as you see it and you propose to the other commissioners in the meeting. Can you take just a second to do that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for being part of the committee, and then for our new member as well. And I think the purpose, the focus, the objectives of the committee are really online. You can take a look at those on the town website. And you're basically here to develop recommendations for updating, clarifying, and improving both the town charter and the code. And recommendations like this can come from, at least we anticipated they could come from town staff, could come from the committee members themselves, or could come from commissioners. We didn't explicitly address recommendations like we just heard from Mr. Spence, that is, recommendations that might come from members of the public, but that's certainly appropriate as well. And we just need to think about the right way to channel those. Does that go through the commissioners first and then to this committee, or can it go just directly to this committee for consideration? I think it's important that we not get too bogged down here this year in terms of trying to come up with final legislative language for any amendment to the code or to the charter. I think it's, first of all, just to get a basic level of understanding where there's some matter of a section of the code that's not well understood, that may conflict with another section of the code, or perhaps is an inappropriate extraction from some other section of the code, perhaps, and it's not as applicable as it should be. We don't have to have the exact amendment, but at least to convey to the commissioners the kinds of issues where there is a lack of understanding, and some recommendations on how that might be improved. What do you think the policy really should be? And if you can define that, if you can articulate that, send that back to the commissioners, we can then get the appropriate people to draft changes to the code. So we could then make that happen within the code, and hopefully it would be both interpretable and enforceable from the town's perspective. It could be, if we're dealing with a zoning issue, and you certainly will be, it will have to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission. So any given issue may come with it in terms of your recommendations. You would also include a recommendation for perhaps another committee or the Planning and Zoning Commission to address that before it becomes back to the commissioners with a final recommendation. So that's really our purpose. I think there are a lot of good issues to work on. We've got a couple here to talk about today. Mr. Spence is adding a few more for us. We've got some issues that have been raised in the charter that we want to talk a little bit about today and set some priorities for. So again, thanks for your participation from everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any
Thanks,
other
Gary.
questions, comments, anything else? Okay.
I have a comment. I'm glad to hear what Gary had to say, because as far as making ordinance about changing budget issues, I'm not prepared to actually
Right.
work on those things. It's a whole different area. I am prepared to do the first section that we talked about, is cleaning up the language. But I think that if we're going to change any fees, that's an ordinance that the commissioners would work on and then get public comment with the assistance of the town manager. But I don't see that as a role of us actually recommending changes in current legislation, just cleaning up the code and the charter. So this may be the wrong committee to be sitting in. And because if that's the way we're going,
No, we're not. I think the goal, I think, is to sort of, as Commissioner Persinger said, it's just, we all here live in town, we know some of the problems and issues here, we've kind of experienced it. What do we think is the right thing to suggest? And we're going to get into a couple of those things here. And so I think what we want to get to is, what's the right thing to suggest to the commissioners? Not so many, we can make recommendations of dollars if we think so, but I think where we got stuck in 2022 is we tried to actually craft code, we tried to craft ordinances, and we got kind of stuck in the weeds. So the idea here is to try and keep it up a bit, keep it up a notch, and just kind of have a good discussion amongst us and in the public about what would make the code and the charter better. And I think that's what we want to try to accomplish here.
Are we, I guess, question of clarification. So, I mean, just taking on the task of reviewing contradictive language seems pretty administrative. And I'm hoping that we're doing a little bit of both. I'm hoping we're not down to the point where we were the last 2 years, where we were taking literal sections of the code and assigning them to each other and going through them, because you and I talked about that. We're not qualified to do that and rewrite them. But I do think it would be remiss if we didn't address, we know that we know, as living here for the length of time we've lived here, we know the issues with the code. We know that there are sections that are extremely problematic in terms of either being outdated, antiquated for how we live as, you know, residents in our homes. And I hope that we'll at least, you know, look at the surface of some of those things, because they're pretty critical and they got us into a lot of trouble.
Right. So my suggestion would be on those, that if you identify specific areas that you want to bring, you know, let's talk out here,
Okay.
we'll add it to the agenda, we'll make it part of the public comment, and we'll open it up for a conversation.
Okay.
And I think we want to try and stay away from unless somebody wants to adopt an item, we'll stay away from that this time. We'll just kind of have the discussion. Hopefully we'll be able to come to some agreement on what it is we're trying to recommend. And we'll try that, see if that approach. And I think one of the things is we took a lot of items and tried to cover them in the old meetings, and I think we're going to take like one or two and just kind of see how we do with those one or two items each meeting, and try and keep the meeting short and to the point, okay? So, all right. So I do want to say, so I did send out just kind of a summary of all the topics that we talked about in 2022. And so, because I thought it was important just to bring closure to the items we had. And so of the 13 that we identified, 10 of them were either closed by the committee ourselves, or the commissioners have passed an ordinance to address those in the time since we started. So those are part of the public record, they're out there. That left 3 items, and 2 of which are on the agenda tonight that we're going to talk about. So everyone, okay, any comments on that kind of path forward? So, okay, so then at this point, let us discuss the first item on the agenda, which is discuss and possibly vote to make recommendations to the town commissioners regarding the following pending code items: 158-51 and 93-1, accessory buildings and impervious materials. I remember this conversation well from last time. First, I wanted to say, Dawn, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Dawn, could you just kind of take us through, and I passed out to everybody in your handouts here as well as online. It's just a summary of the code and Dawn's comments so that you have that to refer back to. So Dawn, could you just kind of refresh our memories on this item?
And you're referencing the 185-51 about accessory buildings, impervious and pervious materials?
Yes, just the pervious and impervious materials. Because I think that was the topic that we had brought up before. Those were the
Yes.
questions we had.
Yes, we did. And so at the time when I read this some time ago, then it created questions in my mind as to what is considered pervious and impervious and so forth. Within that code, it does speak to various items, but it does talk about such as driveways, parking spaces, or sidewalks. It doesn't enumerate other things from there. So it did create a question as to what does this pervious requirement, what does it apply to within our code? Is it only to driveways, parking spaces, or sidewalks? Or is it having to do with the intent of creating something that is pervious and that it could apply to other things, even though it's not enumerated there? That was questions that I had.
Okay. Was one of the items, Don, if I recall, the definition of pervious versus impervious? And also, I remember the conversation being about you could have an impervious item like a paver, but it could be installed in such a way that it would be, no, I'm sorry, impervious, that it would be pervious the way you installed it. Right? There were materials that you could install and therefore would be an impervious solution, which would be.
Yes. Many times there are certain manufacturers that create a material or a paver that water will perk through. And they do state that that is what they are known for. They have that product, and they give instructions as to how to install their product so that they come back and warranty it. However, there also happens to be product that is not pervious or water does not perk through. And so therefore installation of that kind of product, now, even though the water may not go through that material, yet installation allowing water to perk through around that material creates a surface that would be considered pervious, not impervious.
Okay. So I don't recall last time there being a discussion about what was pervious and impervious. Does anybody feel like we need to define those two in, let's say, the index or the in the code itself? Is that pretty self-explanatory, or do you think we need to
I don't
define
think
those?
so. I think they have to be more clearly defined because you're talking about pervious, impervious, and permeable. And really, I don't, I may not be correct, but it's my recollection that there really isn't any concrete product or paver that actually allows water to penetrate through the actual, let's say, the paver itself. The permeable paver is a paver that actually has about a 1/16 of an inch notch on each end. And so what it does is when you buy that particular paver, the contractor, whether they're trained or not, can't install it any other way except the gap. So I think the gap is supposed to be about 1/16, but that's why you can have a regular brick, you can have a concrete block. It's really 100% the application and the layering and the spacing. So I think this has been really confusing for a long time because I don't think we even address the permeable, and these get interchanged. And when you tell someone to go buy a pervious paver, there isn't really a paver that allows water to penetrate through the concrete.
Right.
It's all made by the same process. It's the spacing and it's the layered application. And I think people are confused when the code is saying you must apply a pervious paver, and what contractors consider a pervious paver is their selection that has the notch. But in reality, you can buy any selection at a material manufacturer as long as it's the application is with the spacing.
Right.
And then I think one of the other things we have to consider, and I know that we're doing this with the good intent of, our watershed and drainage, but, the concrete manufacturers, I think, will tell you that within a year with rain and downfall and everything, you really are creating an impervious surface, because what's happening is the watershed is just bringing materials in, laying like a clay level. So while we are creating some benefit, I don't even think Rehoboth requires it, which was surprising to me. I think one of the other applications we have to be careful about is we've got a lot more people, myself included, but a lot more people making applications for pools. I think you just put one in. And it's really a bad application around a pool, because anytime it rains, you get a hard downfall of rain. Whatever's in there, the stone, the gravel, comes up to the surface and it washes off into your pool. So that's one application where I think it's probably not as appropriate. But I think we do have to really come down to a definition of, can you or can't you get any type of paver you want? Is it an application process, and what is it, and clearly define that.
That's what occurred to me.
It is a little
Yeah,
confusing.
that's what occurred to me when I read through it again, is the installation. We don't say anything about how it is installed, because you can take something that is impervious and install in a way that it is now pervious. So I thought that would be something that we should change, is to allow for that. I don't know if anybody else has any other comment.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in this, but I happen to walk around American University with the landscaper, and there are pervious, materials, and it's extremely expensive. So when you're looking at this code and what we're doing and what's mandated, that's where I'm trying to figure it out, because if it's very expensive to get something that's prohibitive, but is there federal law that they have to do this? And legally, I'm not qualified to say what the town is supposed to do and has to do, where this originated, who wrote this code, has it been compared to regions around us as far as pavers and the whole issue of the stormwater management. So I'm kind of confused what role we're playing in this.
Yeah, so I guess that's why I started with Dawn, because the reason this was put here, is it came from the town. It came from code enforcement as to, parts of the code that were confusing. And so that's why I started with Dawn in terms of what was it that we were trying to address in what was her question. And so I'm just recalling, the conversation last year about pervious versus impervious. And I think I think we're in general agreement that we need to define those. I think we're also in agreement that we should allow for the installation, that an installation should be considered in terms of being pervious. It's like trying to get that straight. So that we want to make the recommendations that I think we want to define those, that we allow for installation, and then kind of leave it to code enforcement to decide when something gets submitted to them, does it meet the requirements set for stormwater requirements? John, does that sound like the correct approach?
To some degree, yes. When it comes to things that are considered pervious, impervious, well, let's go back to just straight pervious. And Marcia is absolutely correct that whenever something is considered pervious, it is something that must be maintained. You just cannot have it as a once and done and think that you're not creating a surface that when it rains or floods or whatever, we don't have water sheeting off. So it is a maintenance application as well. So a lot of municipalities I know are having discussions over this. So it would help me if I knew the leaning, the direction that the town wanted to go in, and the intent of having something pervious, not impervious, anything of that nature, so that I can help the residents get something that, a situation that they want, like a patio, a driveway, so forth, but at the same time help the general direction that the town wants to go in order to alleviate as many water problems that we do have.
Okay. So I guess I'm trying to come to is, do we have some kind of consensus, something to make a recommendation? I mean, it's a planning and zoning issue, so it's going to end up, I think, probably with planning and zoning because it's section 185.
I just a question. So we are focusing, particularly Dewey Beach has been focusing a lot of effort on this and getting it defined and trying to implement some of this. But I think, Elaine, something you brought up when you said you walked around AU with a landscaper. So I believe there is concrete that is manufactured, that is breathable, and it's for applications of large commercial shopping centers and things like that, hugely expensive. But in areas where they require it, because the bigger concern with those applications, like our streets, parking lots, that there is a breathable, porous concrete, crazy expensive, but we're not talking about that here. Here, I think it's just the application, and I do think, as far as a recommendation, I think the three issues are the definition of pervious, impervious, and also permeable. And then defining what applications, like Don said, are they driveways and walkways, patios? If your patio is less than a certain square footage, pools, I would say we really have to look at the unintended consequences for pools for homeowners. That's a huge issue. I think there's other ways in terms of looking at pools where, as long as you have a smaller block, maybe we say you must have less than a 6x8 block together with the application underneath, but you don't have to have that gap. You're still getting penetration, but I think in that application, it really creates a mess.
When you're talking about pools, are you talking about the cement collar or just pavers, or like
I'm
a
talking
cement?
about the pavers around them.
Yeah.
As you know, if it's in the driveway and we get a heavy downpour rain, all that
Goes
stuff in between them comes up.
Yep.
That then washes into your pool. So now you've got to drain your pool because you've got stones and concrete. So I think there are some applications that I think pools are one of them, a pool area patio, but driveways, walkways, these are things where they're not creating any harm anyways to other elements of your house. So if someone puts in what pools are generally $100,000 all said and done, you do not want an application where you're getting sand and gravel and particles that are like that washed in every time you have a rainstorm.
So you don't necessarily have an issue with making, let's say, driveways or walkways and even patios pervious. You don't have any problem with that. It's just a concern about what around a swimming pool should be defined.
Yeah, I think it's a really bad unintended consequence of that application around a swimming pool.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Dave,
Yes.
can I make a couple of comments? First of all, with respect to the word permeable, I don't think we use that word in the code anywhere.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong, you can point out where that is. There also, with respect to impervious, there is a general, not a general definition, but a general piece of text at the beginning of the definition sections in the town code, where it says, in essence, that if a term is not specifically defined, then it has the usual dictionary meaning or the usual common usage. So with respect to impervious, you could just look in the dictionary and it simply means that fluid can pass through either the material or the surface. And I think with respect to impervious surfaces, one of the main recommendations that you hear from people who are worried about climate change and stormwater management is that you not create any ground level surface that is impervious, that doesn't let water flow through it. I think that's the direction the town has been going, although I don't think the code has been that specific so that, any patio or any area around a pool or any walkway or any driveway would have to be impervious. But that's the direction the town has been going, that basically any ground level surface would be impervious, no matter what materials you use, whether you use, blocks that are individually impervious. If they're installed in such a way that there's enough gap around the individual blocks, it becomes then a pervious surface. It's really the surface, I think, that you're talking about, the final surface, as opposed to the individual component materials that go into making up the surface. So anyway, just some general comments for you to consider.
Yeah, in the handout I gave you, I did just grab definitions for permeable and or pervious and impervious. I just put them in there because I thought it might help the discussion today in terms of what we're trying to get to. So, my thought was, does it need to go into the code in terms of defining it? If that's a point, Commissioner Persinger thinks, it's the general acceptance of those would work. And then, so I guess if we agree, is it our recommendation we want to actually define those in the code? I mean, I think we need to allow for the installation aspect of that, the application of it. So, trying to get us to some kind of consensus here on what we should go forward with.
I think the application of installations of driveways and everything has been a big, red tag issue. And I think the more we give clarity and definition, because, I've heard people say, well, you must buy pervious pavers that are called pervious pavers. And that's just not correct. Right. There are no pervious pavers. So you've got people going to a yard and they're saying, these are our selection of pervious pavers only because they have the notch in them. And it's like having training wheels on a bike. You don't have to be a master of installation if you have the notch, right. Although you do have to do the ground subsurface. But I don't think we should, I think it has to be clearer because it's a very limited selection. It's not really a pervious paver. And, if we're telling people to go buy pervious pavers and they're not really pervious.
Yeah, I don't think, and Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we're saying you have to install pervious pavers as opposed to the application, whatever the installation is, needs to meet the standards for pervious, to be able to let water pass through it.
I think that's part of the confusion. The language says, the language both says impervious materials and impervious surfaces, and I think.
Correct.
It might make sense to get rid of reference to, or recommend getting rid of reference to impervious materials if what we care about really is that the surface.
It's just be pervious. Okay.
It's the application. Yeah.
Okay.
The language says impervious surface in a couple of spots and materials in another.
Okay. So making that piece of the code consistent, removing.
Yeah, I think what Gary said makes sense to me, which is that if what we really care about is in the end when it's applied,
right,
the combination of the materials and the installation or application of it is either impervious or pervious. It's more a matter of the materials.
What the materials are. Oh, okay. All right.
I think the other one is probably should have them address gravel driveways, because a lot of people think just because you're putting in gravel, you're not using pavers, that you don't have to use the same application. But when you put in for a gravel driveway, when you put in the subsurface of the crush and run, you are creating a solid surface. So the crush and run creates essentially a concrete surface. So there's a lot of people that are putting in gravel, and I don't know that we're applying the application to that, but if you do use the crush and run,
it will become solid.
It will become solid.
Okay.
And I would, again, like them to call out applications for the pool. I think that's a problem. We're getting more and more pool permits every year, and it's something that should be looked at.
So something around the pools to either eliminate or allow for, right? Okay. So I've heard removing the materials reference, we don't really need to we don't really need to add it to the definition in the code, and taking out any of the materials reference, because that seems to be the confusing part of this piece of code,
Mhm.
right?
Certainly.
Okay.
No, that was clear, but it also made it, I just think that you can't vote on this today, that it actually should be rewritten with, instead of us sitting here trying to do it here, and slashed and come back and vote on the next time.
So I'm not, I'm gonna ask Commissioner Persinger for some guidance here, but it wasn't our intent, I think, to actually craft
Vote on
code,
anything?
right? Is to be able to put ideas forward to the commissioners
Mhm.
and let them decide if that should be, if they want to craft the code and bring it to a public hearing, so it would come again in a public discussion with the commissioners,
Mhm.
or if they want to refer it to another committee, they could do that, and then they would actually work on crafting up this specific code. The conversation is what we're trying to get to here today,
Mhm.
which is what I think we did a
Yeah,
very good
I
job
think
of
that's
getting,
good, I think
of
especially.
getting the ideas
whole-
out.
Mhm.
And the application, the material, so that makes me feel better, because I didn't want to vote on anything
Right.
except the suggestions.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's all I'm suggesting is that,
Mhm.
you know, with those three suggestions, I think, can we come to some kind of vote and say, I'm looking for a motion to say, we'll at least put forth our recommendation, that
Mhm.
the three suggestions be moved forward back to the commissioners.
Yeah, I think the only other person I'd like to hear from besides Marcia, because she does so much building in the town, is you do a lot of the work, Bill, on these kind of issues. Do you have any comments about any of this?
I think the most important thing is the way the material's installed, whether it's gravel, whether it's pavers, whatever it is, it's the way it's installed that ensures the water is going to go through it. So I think it's important, that insulation of whatever material is being used for the pervious area, right, that we want water to go through, whether it's a driveway, a patio, or sidewalk, ensures the water goes through it, right? That's, coming out of the climate committee with Commissioner Persinger, that's a huge issue for the town, and not only for our town, but for all the towns along the coast.
And I think, David, the only other thing, it was silly, but we should get it cleaned up. I think our code, I remember as it read, was that it was any surface on the lot, any solid surface. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it went to the ludicrous definition of, that meant your roof, your, like,
Right.
all these things, because we just said any solid surface. So,
Any
you know,
portion,
your
it says any
roof, your,
portion.
it was any portion that was covered. So,
Actually, it says no portion of any building area
right,
shall be covered, paved with impervious material.
correct.
that's-
So I can't
I
build a
agree. We
roof with
should-
water
right.
seeping through it.
So we should also.
Exactly.
That's the best
Okay.
point so far.
That's true, I would also agree with that.
But it,
Okay.
you know, it does lead to a kind of an absurd definition.
The definition of
Mhm.
what is covered in the lot, okay? So I'll add that to it, so now we've got 4 items then.
Mhm.
All right, any other comments? All right, so do I have a motion to push forward those 4 things?
Dave,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but I do have another question on this subject. In the respect that something to consider, is code section 93-1 speaks of paved patios. Let me go back again. So whenever, and a lot of folks already have an existing paved driveway, and so forth, and they want to reseal. And they're doing this in order to preserve the paved driveway, paved area on their lot. So does this then, when they reseal it, is this something that should be allowed with making it an impervious surface? Or is this something that we should just go ahead and allow, and then over time require some sort of change? Should there be a need for less impervious surfaces due to the stormwater management laws and codes that will be coming down from the state?
So I guess the question in my mind is, are we allowing for grandfathering, right, of
Yeah.
services that, right? So, and if
Yes.
if they have been grandfathered, are we going to allow them to be maintained with something like coding? So,
And Dawn, right now, we do that. So if somebody has to have
Yes.
their driveway repaired, they're not extending or making their driveway any bigger, all they're gonna do is, there's a crack in the driveway and all they're gonna do is fix that. We allow them to do that. It's only when they start talking about making the driveway bigger, right, then that's when it becomes
Right.
something that we have to, Dawn and I and Jim Dedes have to look at. So right now, just to do normal repair is fine.
right.
I don't know, Dawn, if you want them to consider maybe looking at that or not, but I think to have, if they're grandfathered in and the driveway's already there and they're only repairing it, they're not enlarging the driveway, I think what the town code says at this time is fine, but I'll lean on you to let us know.
Well, I know in certain areas here in Dewey that there is existing paved driveways, and it is literally the complete front yard of that particular parcel. And then they will come along and want to reseal it and so forth, because they were allowed to do it years ago. So of course, now I have not been enforcing saying you can't do that. No, they've been allowed to reseal and so forth. So my question is this something to consider for the future or think about later?
I kind of feel like if I was allowed to put it in, I should be allowed to maintain it. You know, that's kind of my feeling is, what are you going to say to these people? You made that investment 15, 20 years ago, and now we're not going to allow you to maintain it. That doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to request.
Well, I think that the damage that it's doing that we see, and we're talking, and this actually does impact me because, and that's why it's an important issue, and because it impacts me, no, because it's the spaces, it's a huge parking lot where Marina View is. And that parking lot, we tried to seal it one time, and I think it was because Jim Tyler's on one of the committees, and he knew you can't reseal it. So they'll allow us, if there's cracks, to fix the cracks, but to come in and actually repave it the same way it was paved before, I don't think you can. You know, what do you do with a situation like that? And that's perhaps something that does need to be addressed, because that's a lot of square
Right.
footage in this town of that impacts a lot of Alex's
Yeah,
place.
absolutely.
and-
I mean, I was thinking in the conversation that it was sealing, not repaving. I guess
Well,
that's
no,
what.
to seal it, isn't it like a blacktop that they put on it, Don?
That's my understanding, yes.
I think our code says, if you remove it completely, if you remove it, so if you remove the concrete completely, because the concrete's cracked and blocked and chipped, you must do the new application. But if you don't remove it, you can maintain it in any way pretty much that you wish. And personally, I think that's a pretty fair way to address it.
I agree with you. I mean, that's the only way I know to do that. So
It has
and I
been
think that's what the
consistent.
town's doing now anyway.
It's been inconsistent, so I think perhaps it's something that does need to be addressed, because, you know,
Okay. Well, I think is that
thought
something,
about.
Dawn and Bill, we can leave with you in terms of how it's applied, because that's where it would be applied consistently. So I'll add it. I did have one other thing I wanted to ask Dawn while we're here is paved patios. So when a plan calls for a patio today, is there a requirement for it to be impervious or pervious? Marcia, I know you're gonna know this.
Yeah,
Is there any definition?
I don't think what the code requires is clear enough. In some portions, it's contradicting that it could really be enforced as it is.
So Dawn, do you get designs with concrete patios?
Sometimes, yes.
And and without putting you on the spot, do they get approved, or what's your, do you approve them or not?
Okay, I'm not going to be on the spot. All right. So when it comes to the issue of looking at Dewey, and water and pervious and impervious. My understanding is, and I could be 100% wrong, is that Dewey is looking to help the environment to the best possible. And so therefore, pervious, the intent would be for all surfaces that may cover the building lot area outside of the dwelling itself does need to be pervious to the best possible so that there's not as much water sheeting off of the actual structure itself, either heading toward the neighbor, heading toward the road, ponding in that yard and so forth. So the intent is to be as pervious as possible for any area on the building lot. And I do require patios to be pervious, driveways to be pervious, sidewalks to be as pervious, and so forth. And yes, not necessarily the materials, but the installation.
Right.
From what
Right.
I have found from other municipalities, that is the key factor.
Okay. All right.
And the
So,
grandfather.
so with that, do you feel comfortable seconding this and moving it forward with those suggestions?
Mhm.
Is that agreeable to the group? Okay, can I just get a second to that? And then we'll just,
A second.
second, thank you, Marcia. And then, all in favor? Aye, okay.
That only took us 3 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so we've gone kind of long. I'm gonna offer this since we want to kind of move along. I think we'd be good to talk about the charter a little bit. Does anyone have an objection if we take the next item, item B on the agenda and postpone it to next week? Or next meeting, excuse me. Not next week, next meeting. Any objections?
Do you think that we could get through this quickly at 18521? I mean, this seems to be something that is really non-controversial, or is it?
Yeah, well, I don't think it is, but.
This was just the smoke detector.
It's just the
Yeah.
carbon monoxide, like, so the question, we'll take a second, we can just discuss it. So the issue, I think, before was, our code doesn't have anything in it for carbon monoxide detectors. The conversation, right? Should we put something in? And my suggestion is, yes, let's put something in, and let's just adopt, Delaware has their own requirements that they have Title 16. I put it right in here for the documents. And my suggestion would be to the town, just go ahead and implement code that meets the state standards. Right? Does anybody?
I think that sounds smart and easy, but I also think that you need, I believe that propane stoves also have a different type of detection device. So I think if you're going to implement them all, since we are propane largely, if we have gas, it should include the propane.
It says propane.
It does?
It does
say
say,
that.
it does
Okay.
have it in title,
Okay.
in the state requirement. And it talks about, because I know there's a requirement for garages and everything like that. So just rather than us kind of reinvent the wheel, my suggestion would be to the town, adopt the state standards.
Perfect.
I'm off of that.
Okay?
Yep.
All right, so we're all in agreement? So I'm just gonna ask for a first.
See, we
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve.
This would be for a citation. What part of the Dell codes?
1 second.
18521,
No, that
Oh.
Their piece of the code is
Delaware Code 660.
Title 16.
Yeah.
And if you take a look, it starts with the definitions. 6601,
6601.
yep, see?
Yes.
It starts there and it continues on. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Does anybody online have a comment that they'd like to make regarding this issue? Any Zoom? No? Okay. All right. So with that, can we get I don't think we did this, so I'm gonna ask, can we get a motion to move this forward to adopt the state standards?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, and a second? Wayne, all right, all in favor? Aye. Unanimous? Okay. Thanks, Elaine. Got us right through that one.
Knew that one.
That was an easy one, all right, good. Okay, the next item is to discuss the focus of of the charter. So Commissioner Persinger, I wonder if you might, and if for all of you, there was a copy of it. It has Commissioner Persinger kind of summarize some of the issues the town commissioners kind of looked at. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Persinger just to kind of, I think maybe there's obviously a number of items here. So maybe if we want to just take like the first one or two, Gary, or if you want to give an overview, and then if you have a suggestion about how we might address it, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me give you some suggestions with respect to how to prioritize some of these things, because I think that there are some elements here that I think would best be handled by me coming back to the committee with a proposed solution, and then you reacting to that solution, and then giving us your thoughts about that solution. There are a few others here where I think it requires some more discussion, some more thought, perhaps even some background research on them. And first of all, this came up because for whatever reason, the mayor took the opportunity to go through the town charter and a little bit of the town code and came up with some questions and some suggested changes that we might consider in terms of amendments to the town charter. The town charter is actually a document that's really part of state law. Any changes to it have to be approved by the state legislature. So we have to deal with the state legislative calendar in terms of bringing forward any of these amendments that we would like to have made. So that said, we're really talking about trying over the next couple of months to get some recommendations back to the commissioners so that we can develop some amendments that could be considered by the state legislature, if in fact it seems appropriate to make any changes. So let me discuss a little bit about the ones that I think require some thought and some discussion. The first one is really the first one: qualifications of the mayor and the town commissioners. It's Section 5 of the town charter. And currently, as the town charter is set up, we have to have at least 2 commissioners that are residents of the town. We could have 3, but we have to have at least 2. The remaining 3 seats can be non-resident commissioners. So what that sets up is a situation where if we haven't had an election the last couple of years, but just take the last, this past September, we had 1 resident seat that was up for election. We had 2 non-resident seats. Had we gotten another person to file for this past election who was a non-resident, and we would have had to have an election, but in essence, Paul Bauer would have been elected by default because we have to have 2 sitting commissioners who are residents. And then the other 3 non-resident candidates would have had to go through the election. And it wouldn't have mattered how many votes that Paul Bauer would have gotten. He could have finished in last place, but he would have been the only resident candidate and therefore would have been elected. Is that a problem? Is that something that we need to change? Should we change the number of required resident commissioners? If we took it down to 1, then whoever that resident commissioner is would automatically be mayor. If in fact we left in place the requirement that the mayor has to be a resident, should we open? Is there anything here that we're uncomfortable with? That you, first of all, are uncomfortable with? Are there any changes that you think that we should make in terms of how this is established with 2 resident commissioners and 3 non-resident commissioners? So it's really an open question. It's really something that you guys can discuss. If you don't think it's necessary to make any changes, that can be a recommendation back to the commissioners. So that's, first of all, the first issue. Let me just go through these and then we can come back to some questions. The second one is also an election issue. And that is, I think if you'll recall that about 5 years ago, I think Rehoboth took up the issue of whether or not voting rights could be extended to members of an LLC. And I think it was a very controversial issue that they undertook. And I think, the final analysis, they decided not to make any changes and not to open up that opportunity. So the question here that has been raised is whether or not Dewey should consider expanding voting rights to a member of an LLC LLP or corporation. And there's a suggested paragraph that was drafted by the mayor for consideration. There are probably a whole host of issues that need to be worried about and considered and discussed and hashed through in terms of making a recommendation on this, but that's the essence of the issue here. The last issue that I want to mention is this is really section 26, and also there's an earlier section in terms of enumeration of powers where there's a limit on town indebtedness. The limit is $3 million. If you'll recall, when we took this up a couple of years ago and made all of the initial changes to the charter, the debt limit at that time was $1.5 million. This committee recommended $3.5 million, and the commissioners backed that down to $3 million. We are building a new town hall. I would hope that we would not have to test this limit even of $3 million in terms of any debt that we might have to incur in building the new town hall. But there's an open question here. Is there a need to increase this? Should you go back to the $3.5 million, for example, that was initially recommended? There are other ways maybe this should be adjusted every year based on some sort of inflation indicator. It's an open question for your discussion. Not looking necessarily for specific changes, but just what you would recommend in terms of what the policy should be. Let me stop there. I think the rest of these largely could be handled with some additional legal analysis and then a recommendation back to you. But I think those are three areas that hopefully you could prioritize and put some thought to and give some recommendations back to the town council.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Gary, what's the, do you know offhand what the current town debt is and what the projection is for the cost of the town hall?
So, I mean, I could answer that, Commissioner. So right now, there is no town debt. In fact, Commissioner Persinger, myself, and our financial manager, Sheena, have come up with a rainy day fund, which is approximately 6 months of the total revenue it needs to run the town, the expenses. And then there is another 90-day fund, correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Persinger, and we have to meet those throughout the year. So as our budget moves through the year, we put the money in to try to meet those requirements. And I'll go to the second one, then Commissioner Persinger can add any comments. Right now, the approximate cost of the town hall is anywhere between $7 and $7.2 million. We have approximately a $3 million grant we're getting from the state. We have another, I think, 2.5 or 2.3 million, Commissioner Persinger, the town is willing to put in. So that leaves another 2 million. Now the county, they were going to be putting an EMS paramedic station into that. And right now, verbally, they are telling us they are reviewing the $1 million that we've requested that they put in. So if they do vote and agree to put the $1 million in that they've agreed to, then we will be looking at about $1 million that, as of right now, and of course, costs go up. I don't know, Commissioner Persinger, I can't remember if we included furniture in that cost, but those are the figures that I remember.
Yeah, I don't think furnishings are included in the cost. That's my recollection. In addition, just a few comments. In addition to the $3 million state grant, we were able from previous budget surpluses to create a capital improvement fund for the town hall. It's about $2.3 million currently. We are adding to that fund this year half of the hotel tax, which is somewhere around $225,000. And I would anticipate that we would be able to make that same contribution from the hotel tax next year as well. Don't know if that will extend to a third year. If there are any budget surpluses this year, if we are very fortunate and our income, well exceeds expenditures this year, we would certainly, I would think, have a serious discussion among the commissioners to devote some additional money to the cost of the town hall. I'm very interested in minimizing any debt that we have to incur as much as possible. But, you know, at the end of the day, to get the town hall built and to have something that's going to last for, you know, quite a number of years, you know, we may have to incur some level of debt.
Right now, there's no debt.
That's good. That was good. Thank you. That was very helpful for all of it. So,
You have public comment on this item.
okay. Go ahead. Who do we have from the public that'd like to speak?
David Moskowitz.
Hi, David. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a full-time resident of Dewey Beach, and what Commissioner Persinger had reiterated about removing residency of commissioners bothers me greatly. It would disenfranchise the residents, because if you look at Rehoboth and Bethany, they require actually 4/7 commissioners be residents. So having, right now it's 2/5, which is 40%. Dewey should be going the other way, having 3 commissioners as residents, not 2, but like to take away the 2 resident commissioners, that would disenfranchise the residents. The LLC voting is problematic as well and will lead to massive fraud. Like, you have a place like Surf Club, which people may not be aware of, that each week is like a different owner. So there's an A, B, C, and D. So if one owner would form 4 LLCs, in theory, they could vote 8 times, a married couple, and it would versus an actual resident who lives in town. So, I mean, I don't need to be disenfranchised. And remember, even if it passes this committee, it would have to pass the commissioners. And if it would pass the commissioners, I'm happy to let the state and every representative know that this would disenfranchise the residents. And I'm sure every other resident would be very upset, because some of the people I've spoken to already about this idea were up in arms. And I'll quote you Rehoboth's quote. If you look in the documents filed with the Secretary of State's offices, all you have for an LLC is a contact person. Well, that contact person could be the registered agent. It could be the owner of the LLC. It could be the next door neighbor. It could be anyone. And there's a reason why Rehoboth didn't go for it. So why would Dewey even consider it or step in this minefield of starting to change residency requirements and disenfranchise the residents when you have so many more full-time residents than ever in this town?
Okay.
And just one last thing is, this is a discuss only item, so you cannot take a vote on it today, even if you wanted to. Thank you.
Right. I think, thank you, David, for your comments. And just to kind of speak to that, I thought we'd just hear the items this week, think about them, and we come back next meeting, we can kind of discuss them, give us some time to think about it and do our own research, and then kind of make recommendations. So that was kind of my thinking for today's meeting. There's no vote required on this, just for Commissioner Persinger to lay out the most important ones for us and for us to think about.
Now, do you want us all to take, I mean, these issues, I could read through them pretty quickly, and obviously they've been around for a long time. Do you want us to take particular ones and do research on them? I mean, obviously the election, since I'm the chair of the election board, I know I could give you information, but I don't think I could vote on these things, or even, yeah, I think I'd have to set aside, but obviously I could give information to you all about what my opinion is, but I wouldn't.
So what I think we'd like to do is, rather than make assignments, is just kind of think about these 3
Okay.
things. The ones that, so it was section 5, section 10, and the other is section 23/26, because 26 is kind of duplicative of 23. So I would just say, let's just take those 3 things and give them some thought, and we'll put those on the agenda for the next meeting.
time.
If that's agreeable with everyone, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
And then we can
I agree.
vote, make a recommendation, and move forward.
Yeah.
Did I miss something, or are we discussing accessory buildings, or is that next?
That was the one we did.
Oh.
So we could, the accessory buildings was the previous.
Previous.
I
Do you really want to go back?
I did not know a patio was an accessory building.
But if there's something else in that section of code that you'd like to bring forward.
Probably the title of it should be changed.
Yeah.
Wow.
I thought the same
I do
thing.
agree.
Okay.
No, you didn't miss anything. All right. So, any other comments from any other comments from the commissioners here today?
No.
Okay. I'm going to suggest, I'll just reach out via email and just reach out and try and get another meeting together. I'm thinking in a month or so, we'll just work around Thanksgiving if that's okay with everyone. And so with that, is there any other public discussion? Anybody else in the public?
No.
Okay, with that, we'll close the public meeting.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
I wanted to ask Bill, how quickly some of these things that have come up in the charter, do you feel, like, for instance, people working other jobs, and that might be very important to other people, and I guess right now they're not allowed to,
What was your?
like your employees not being able to work other jobs. I mean, are there issues here in the charter that you'd like to have us address quicker?
So I was gonna actually email Dave and say, hey, like the lifeguard captain, I'm just using this as an example, he's never had a contract.
Right.
And the suggestion by one of the commissioners was, should he have a 3-year contract? I think, I have a 3-year contract. I think he should have a 3-year, or she should have a 3-year. The chief has a contract. So I think that would be one that I would suggest the next time we come in.
Okay.
So, and that should be, I would think, an easy one, but it may not be. There may be a lot of discussion, and somebody may not think they need to have a contract, but that would be one that I would ask possibly.
Let's add that, and then we'll add that to the fourth item then.
Dave?
Yes.
I mean, I think that's a good example of what I was talking about before. I think there are several of these where we could just come to you with a proposed solution.
Yeah.
And then you could react to that solution. And I think that's the easiest way to get through some of these things.
Okay. So Commissioner, do you want us to just kind of review these, and if you've got suggestions in the next meeting, make them for those couple items I've pointed out here?
If you could focus on the 3 that I talked about, and then I could come to you with a proposed solution for the others. Some of them, requires a little legal research. Moving the hotel tax and the accommodations tax out of the charter into just the code, that I think requires some legal research, and I think it's probably not possible to do that. There's another question in there about raising the possible fine that the alderman or the assistant alderman may levy. There's a legal issue in there, and whether or not there's a conflict with other sections of our code. If we recall, in the trees ordinance that we passed a few months ago, we levied, or potentially would levy, some pretty heavy fines for people not following the tree ordinance. And those fines actually could increase quite a bit as well beyond the limits that are set there for the alderman and the assistant alderman. Is that a legal conflict? I don't know, but there is a question about whether you should raise that. And I think we could come back to you with a proposal for, if there is a proposal to raise it, how much could it be raised? And I think you could react to that. And that's probably, again, the most efficient way to do that.
Okay. All right. So we'll just consider the 3, and we'll have you guys come back to us in the next meeting for any other suggestions for the contract and alderman fees.
And how about section 16, which I think is already happening? We could possibly include that as well. That's about, should parking administration be added to the list of responsibilities of the town manager?
Yeah, I think we could come back to you with a proposed solution, and you could react to that.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
All right. So with that said, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Okay. Dan? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
And Jen? I'm sorry, I didn't reach out to you during the meeting, but I appreciate you sitting in it, and we'll look forward to your future contributions.
Sounds good. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
thank you. That meeting's closed.
Thank you, Jen.